5:01 on the U.S. East Coast. The backlash is growing over the U.S. president revoking security clearance for one former official and threatening to do the same for more.
So far, 75 former intelligence officials have spoken out against it, issuing more stinging rebukes for revoking the security clearance of former CIA Director John Brennan.
A letter from 60 former CIA officials say the country is weakened when a political litmus test is tied to security clearances.
That is on top of the statement from 15 former CIA directors, deputy directors, and a director of national intelligence serving under both Republican and Democratic administrations back to the 1980s. They say the president's actions are politically motivated.
And this from the Washington Post, reporting the White House has already drafted documents revoking clearances for more people that Mr. Trump feels should be punished for criticizing him or for playing a role in the Russia investigation, and it's planning to roll them out to distract from negative news stories and negative news cycles.
So what is Mr. Trump saying? Before leaving for New Jersey, he had plenty to say, and our Caitlin Collins was there.
President Trump lashing out at the Russia investigation, reminding critics that his presidential powers go a long way. Defending his decision to strip former CIA Chief John Brennan of his security clearance and rejecting criticism that he's trying to silence his critics.
If anything, I'm giving him a bigger voice. Many people don't even know who he is, and now he has a bigger voice, and that's okay with me because I like taking on voices like that. I've never respected him.
That, as sources tell CNN, Trump is prepared to revoke more clearances in the coming days. His next target, Bruce Orr, a little-known Justice Department employee.
I think Bruce Orr is a disgrace. I suspect I'll be taking it away very quickly.
Trump has repeatedly targeted Orr because of his contacts with Christopher Steele, the former British spy who investigated Trump's ties to Russia. The Department of Justice has said Orr has no involvement with Robert Mueller's investigation.
For him to be in the Justice Department and to be doing what he did, that is a disgrace. That is disqualifying for Mueller.
Trump reveling in what he sees as rave reviews.
And I know that I've gotten tremendous response from having done that because security clearances are very important to me.
But the reviews haven't all been positive. In a stinging rebuke, more than a dozen former intelligence officials issued a joint statement criticizing the move, calling it ill-considered, unprecedented, and an attempt to stifle free speech. The president, in his own words, drawing a direct line between revoking clearances and the Russia investigation.
Look, I say it again. That whole situation is a rigged witch hunt. It's a totally rigged deal. It's not us. It is a rigged witch hunt. I've said it for a long time.
Trump showing little interest in sitting down with the special counsel.
Mr. Mueller has a lot of conflicts also, directly yourself, so you know that. Mr. Mueller is highly conflicted. In fact, Comey is like his best friend. I could go into conflict after conflict. But sadly, Mr. Mueller is conflicted.
The president encouraging Mueller to wrap things up.
Let him write his report. We did nothing. There's no collusion.
Caitlin Collins, CNN, the White House.
Well, one thing is for sure, John Brennan is not keeping quiet over all of this.
Not by any means. The former CIA director under President Obama has been highly critical of President Trump. He said Mr. Trump's claims of no collusion with Russia, he said they are, quote, hogwash. And after he was stripped of his security clearance, he said that it was part of a broader effort to punish critics and should worry all Americans.
But his most stinging words came Friday night when he said this.
He's drunk on power. He really is. And I think he's abusing the powers of that office. I think right now this country is in a crisis in terms of what Mr. Trump has done and is liable to do. And so are the Republicans on the Hill who has given him a pass. So they're going to wait for a disaster to happen before they actually find their backbones and spines to speak up against somebody who clearly is not carrying out his responsibilities.
Kate Andrews is U.S. political columnist for City AM and news editor at the Institute of Economic Affairs. She joins us now from London. Kate, Thanks for joining us to talk about this. Let's reiterate again what we had in that last report. 60 former CIA officials signing on to a letter to President Trump about the Brennan security clearance. Let's read more about what they said in that letter. All of us believe, they write, it is critical to protect classified information from unauthorized disclosure. But we believe equally strongly that former government officials have the right to express their unclassified views on what they see as critical national security issues without fear of being punished for doing so. We should point out that these officials served under both Republican and Democrat administrations. Is the president stepping into a minefield here?
Thanks for having me, Natalie. I think it's really important to separate two issues here. The first is whether or not we can talk about a very important topic, which is whether or not in certain circumstances security clearance should be revoked and is appropriate to be revoked. I see circumstances in which it is. If you look at the 13 guidelines for which you can revoke somebody's security clearance, they include things like outside issues, outside activities, specifically also financial contributions that they might be getting from elsewhere. And if someone has decided to go on the public speaking circuit or to go on, get paid by national television to express their political views, I think it's legitimate to question whether or not they should still have security clearance. We have to separate that important conversation from what Donald Trump is actually doing.
But what about dozens and dozens of former officials saying this is not about speaker fees, this is not about getting paid, this is about the president using the White House to try to stop criticism of him?
Well, exactly. And that is the second point. That is why Donald Trump is actually revoking security clearance, which is hugely inappropriate and problematic. The president is doing this because it's a political tactic, because he's trying to go after his political opponents, and that should not be involved at all in any circumstance when we're discussing security clearance. So I think the criticism of the president is extremely important. I just don't want that to become a reason that we can't discuss security clearance overall, and I do fear that that's happening a bit here. When somebody does decide that they no longer want to sit in their role as a civil servant, here in the UK, there are extremely strict rules about what you can and cannot say as a civil servant. That's true in the US as well. You are not supposed to be political either. If somebody wants to break out of that and embrace their freedom of speech, to criticize somebody, to take speaking fees to do so, that's absolutely fine. Then we can question whether or not security clearance is still appropriate. It's just become very clear, especially through this issue of Bruce Orr, that the president is not interested in actually following the rules or guidelines either. He's going after people for political sport, and that is completely inappropriate and wrong.
Bruce Orr, the lower level Justice Department employee, the president thinks that his actions brought about the Russia investigation. No proof of that. Let's listen again to the former CIA chief Brennan on the president's move.
I think he's out of control. He has the steering wheel of the American vehicle in his hands, and he's veering wildly right now. He's trying to preserve and protect himself. And so what more demonstration do you want? When things get really, really bad? I'm glad that if his revoking my security clearance is going to wake some people up.
Clearly, Brennan may get more attention to his comments about the president now because of this action. So is this move by President Trump going to backfire?
That's really hard to say. President Trump is always playing to his base, and it still seems, regardless of what happens or regardless of the hugely questionable or downright, let's be honest, racist things that he sometimes says, it hasn't seemed to sway his base very much. So it's hard to know if the backlash is going to matter with the people who might show up, say, in November to vote locally and to vote for local representatives. It's hard to know. What is clear is that there's this huge standoff now between officials and the President of the United States. And sometimes I wonder how many people are actually tuning into this debate. Do they understand the connections? Do they understand exactly what's going on here? Because the language from the president is so different from the language of the officials. You would think there were two completely separate stories going on. So depending on who the public are listening to, and we know the American public is becoming much more polarized in the age of Trump, it's hard to know if there's going to be backlash because people are continuing to support the side that they signed up to begin with.
Well, we know that Republicans on Capitol Hill have been mum over this issue. We'll wait and see if that continues. Kate, we appreciate it. Kate Andrews for us from London. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now to this CNN exclusive, a report on the war in Yemen. We now know that a bomb that was dropped on a school bus this month by the Saudi-led coalition. We now know that bomb was supplied by the United States.
Around 50 people were killed, including 40 children. CNN's Nema El-Bagher has more about it and this bomb that we're learning about. We warn you, her report does contain disturbing video.
Every day, Zaid al-Humran visits the graveyard where his 2 little boys are buried. Today, he brought their 5-year-old brother along. He's all Zaid has left.
People were screaming out the names of their children. I tried to tell the women it couldn't be true, but then a man ran through the crowd, shouting that a plane had struck the children's bus.
On August 9th, Zaid's son Osama filmed his class on their long-awaited school trip, a reward for graduating summer school. Within hours, and it had all gone horribly wrong. A plane from the US-backed Saudi-led coalition struck a bus carrying them. Dozens died. Some of the bodies were so mutilated, identification became impossible. All that's left are the scraps of school books, warped metal, and a single backpack. Eyewitnesses tell CNN this was a direct hit in the middle of a busy market.
I saw the bomb hit the bus. It blew it into those shops and threw bodies clear to the other side of those buildings. We found bodies scattered everywhere. There was a severed head inside the bomb crater.
This video of shrapnel was filmed in the aftermath of the attack and sent to CNN by a contact in Sada. A cameraman working for CNN subsequently filmed these images for us. Munitions experts tell CNN this was a US-made Mark Mk-82 bomb, weighing in at half a ton. The first 5 digits there are the cage number, the commercial and government entity number. This number here denotes Lockheed Martin, one of the top US defense contractors.
We're at the forefront of the science that makes them real.
This particular Mk-82 is a paveway, a laser-guided precision bomb. Its targeting accuracy a particular point of pride for Lockheed Martin. Part of an arms deal with Saudi Arabia sanctioned and contracted out by the US government. So why does this matter? Because the devastation inflicted by the Mk-82 is all too familiar in Yemen. In March 2016, a strike on a market using the similarly laser-guided 2,000-pound Mk-84 killed 97 people. In October 2016, another strike on a funeral hall killed 155 people and wounded hundreds more. Then the bus attack on August 9th, where they're still counting the dead. The US doesn't just sell arms to the coalition in its battle against the Iranian-backed rebel Houthi militias. It provides intelligence, help with targeting procedures, mid-air refueling. President Obama blocked sales of precision-guided military technology to Saudi Arabia over human rights concerns. 6 months later, under the newly elected Trump administration, then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson overturned the ban.
Look, there's a balance that needs to be struck. The president also noted that the Saudis have a right to defend themselves. They were being attacked from across the southern border by Houthis who were aided by Iran and were launching rockets and missiles. What I would tell you is that we certainly had, under the Obama administration's deep concerns about the way the Saudis were targeting. And we acted on those concerns by limiting the kinds of munitions that they were being given and stridently trying to argue for them to be more careful and cautious.
Saudi Arabia denies targeting civilians and defended the incident as a legitimate military operation and a retaliatory response to a Houthi ballistic missile from the day before. When asked to comment on CNN's evidence, coalition spokesperson Turki al-Maliki told us the coalition is taking all practical measures to minimize civilian casualties. Every civilian casualty is a tragedy, adding that it would not be appropriate for the coalition to comment further while the investigation is underway. The US wouldn't comment on the origins of the bomb, but the State Department is calling for a Saudi-led investigation, which the US Defense Secretary supports.
Wars are always tragic, But we've got to find a way to protect innocent in the midst of this one.
Osama's cell phone footage is all that his father has left of the two boys. Their last happy moments. Osama's father isn't optimistic that an investigation will change anything. In a country where loss has become commonplace, they aren't even praying for justice anymore. Just peace. Ni'am al-Barish, CNN, London.
Well, earlier I spoke with retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona. He is a CNN military analyst. He discussed the ways the Saudi-led coalition plans targets.
This strike was probably a quick reaction strike. There was a Houthi missile attack on Saudi Arabia the day before. One person was killed when the missile was intercepted. The Saudis were looking for retaliation, and that's the story of this war: tit for tat. One side does something, the other side just retaliates, and it continues. So the Saudis wanted to strike back. They probably had a quick reaction package ready to go, and they said, "We know the Houthis are using this particular area for their command and control and their planning," and they probably launched a sortie right at that. Unfortunately, it happened to be in a marketplace. It happened to be in a crowded marketplace, and that school bus happened to be there. I have no doubt that the Saudis actually hit what they were aiming at. The problem was, as you've talked about, the target selection process really needs to be looked at.
Right, absolutely. And as you mentioned, that school bus was right there at that market when it took a direct hit. The U.S. has worked with Saudi Arabia to try and protect civilians in this war, but it's just not happening, is it? Is there an explanation?
The explanation is the Saudis are not following proper targeting procedures. There's a target validation process, and we've gone over for decades. We've been working with them on this, and I can tell you from personal experience, working with the Saudis can be, be polite, challenging and frustrating. And you can teach them, but they don't always listen.
That was retired Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona. What the Saudi Arabia insisted is not targeting Yemeni civilians, and the strike on the school bus was a mistake.
The worst flooding in nearly a century in India's Kerala state has seen hundreds of people lose their lives, and the devastation, it is intense there, as you can see. When we return, our meteorologist Derek Van Dam is here to explain why the conditions there are so bad.
Plus, why some of the victims' families from the bridge collapse in Genoa, Italy, are boycotting the state funeral for them.